your surprise. You're in for a shock. In London town streets, when there's darkness and fire, when you least expect me, and you turn your back, I'll attack. I smile when I'm sneaking through shadows by the wall. I laugh when I'm creeping, but you won't hear me at all. Oh, hear my warning, never turn your back on the rip-off. You'll soon shake with fear, then never knowing if I'm near. I'm sly and I'm shameless, nocturnal and nameless, except for the ripper, or if you like, Jack the Knife.
Three, two, one, and we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Ryzen Threadripper 2950X custom build, part 5. This is finally the overclocking video with PBO. Now, before we get started, I just want to wish you guys a belated happy Thanksgiving. I hope your Thanksgiving was fruitful. Mine was, to say the least. And a great Black Friday, because mine was absurd in a good way. Anybody has questions about that, we can talk about that towards the end of the stream. Now, real quick, part 1, 4, and 5, in my opinion, are probably the most beneficial videos to watch as far as these live streaming in this series of the Threadripper build. Those provide you with the majority of the information that could be important if you're going to be building a Threadripper. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 2950X. However, because this is a stream, and obviously I talk a lot, I would recommend one of two things to try to get to the information you need, aside from just asking me directly, either in the comment section below or on the stream. You can speed up the playback once the video is archived, or just click through the timeline. Now, excuse me, this originally was supposed to be part 4, but because some of you may or may not know, part 4 got pushed, or ended up becoming a progress update because the AIO did fail on me after 3 days. Well, technically on the 4th day. For those of you who are aware, the first part 1 was to test all the hardware, make sure everything worked. And I did that. I did it for about 26 hours, which is what I normally do for when I do a build. And everything looked good. So I proceeded to do part 2, where I installed Windows. I actually did the update, did Windows and everything. And even proceeded to do part 3. It wasn't until Sunday the AIO died. It actually, well, I don't know if I necessarily put it in the words that it died, but it started to fail. And it actually started to fail shortly after I updated the driver chipset. And as weird as this may sound, I was actually wondering if it had been maybe the chipset that was causing the problem in regards to why it might have failed. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I thought that what happened was the chipset obviously is a driver that's loaded within Windows. And Windows is going to communicate with the BIOS. As it's communicating with the BIOS, I thought a possibility that maybe it did something, a bug or something within the software that disrupted communication with the PWM header that basically was running the pump or for the cooler. That was the secondary thing. The first thing is the pump is failing. Something's up with the cooling. I knew that. So the other possibility was maybe the chipset, and then the worst case scenario was something with the actual board. Long story short, which is too late because part 4 was not a short story, it was in fact the AIO. Now, real quickly, I'm going to second here. I'm going to bring up the AIO that I bought. Now, some of you are aware of the AIO that I bought, but it was this one right here, the Cooler Master Master Liquid ML360 RGB AIO. This particular cooler, as I mentioned in part 1 and a few of the other videos, was at that time was the second and only true AIO that supported Threadripper, where it had full coverage cooling over the internal heat spreader or the heating plate. And for whatever reason, the Ernimax had a high failure rate, so I didn't want to go with that. And I went with this one mainly because at the time there was only one review, and it was all 5-star or 5 eggs, and it was pretty much my only other option other than going air. And as I mentioned before, I didn't want to go air because I live in South Texas and our summers here are brutal. So I ended up going with this at the recommendation of obviously that particular review that I read on Newegg. And then this guy here that runs the Extreme IT channel, he did a review and he actually tested the Cooler Master AIO. Now, I just want to mention real quickly that it is very much possible that I just got a lemon. That is possible. That is one of the reasons why I was testing the hardware when I did, because sometimes hardware fails, or sometimes it's DOA when you get it. Generally after 24 hours or more, slightly more, if it hasn't failed at that point, you're usually in the green to go proceed forward and take your hardware from your test bench and migrate it into the case and finalize the build. But unfortunately, this cooler, it failed. So, furthermore, afterwards, that put me in a bad spot, and I ended up having to tear the system completely apart, RMA it, and then I had to figure out what I was going to do for a cooler. Well, about 3 days maybe after I had ordered this cooler, Corsair released the 280 that supports Threadripper. But I had already ordered this. I had not gotten it yet, and I didn't want to cancel the order and go with the Corsair, even though I prefer Corsair. I've always used Corsair in my personal builds, and most of my clients as well. And to this day, I'd say at least 10 years I've been using them, have never, knock on wood, ever had one fail. I get one Cooler Master and it fails on me the first time. Now, it could be coincidence. I don't want to throw Cooler Master under the bus because, I could get a Corsair, the next time, and maybe it fails too. But the fact that I've probably built 1,000 systems easily within that time frame, and I'd say several of them I'd say probably at least 3/4 of those all had Corsair water coolers, and none of them ever failed. That's a pretty good success rate for Corsair. Another reason why I like going with them is because of the software, which we'll get into in just a minute. But before we do that, if you notice now, at the time, this had a 5-star review or 5 egg review, but there was only one review. Now, if you go to the reviews, it's now dropped to 2. I don't know how many we've got total here, but we've got a lot of negative reviews. I've also left a review. I did leave a negative review for it. And I put a negative review mainly because this cooler really set me back in so many ways. Because, you know, not only did I have to tear it all apart, RMA it, but then I also had to order a new one, and then it was not in stock, which was the Corsair. I had to wait for that, and then once it came in stock, it got shipped to me, and then I went through. This is not Quartermaster's fault. This is nobody's fault. Really, it's just a very zippity doo dah day. But me getting the damn cooler, that the Corsair, was a lot of extra work that I really should not have had to go through. That was extremely frustrating. So what happened was FedEx was supposed to deliver it, and they couldn't find my residence, which I live in a gated community. It's pretty hard to miss. It's not small. It's not hidden behind trees. It's, you know, pretty out there. But we got a pretty big fenced off wall and everything. We got good security. And they decided just not to deliver. So I contacted FedEx. They recommended I go down to the distribution center to pick it up. So I get down there. I leave about 2 hours early because of traffic, which was good because I was stuck in traffic for an hour and a half because there was an accident. I get there, and the guy isn't there, so I had to wait. And then I waited, and then he calls in and says he's going to be an hour late. So I have to wait another hour. So I've already lost 2 hours. And then he contacts us, or FedEx, back because they let him know I was there to pick it up. And he no longer has the package. He decided to leave it with Walgreens. And I'm like, why would he do that? He had already gotten instructions to bring it back to the distribution center because I was there to pick it up. And he just left it at Walgreens. Nobody told him to do it. He just decided to do it. So that was another frustration. And I was already having an off day because some other things happening. I won't get into that. So I'm like, okay, well, which Walgreens did he leave it at? Fortunately, he left it at the Walgreens near my residence, which is roughly within walking distance. So I drive all the way back home, and I go to Walgreens to pick it up. They can't find it. And I'm sitting there, and they did find it eventually. It was there. But, I had to wait for them to look for it. The incompetence level that day from the majority of people I had to deal with was just uncanny. I mean, it was pretty absurd, but I didn't get ugly with anybody. In fact, one of the ladies at FedEx was very, very nice. She even offered to do some things to help mitigate the problems in the future by possibly getting that truck or that delivery guy replaced because they've had a lot of problems with him. And I'm like, no, I don't want to get anybody fired. Shit happens, but they probably do need to see if they can work with him and get him up to speed on doing what he's supposed to do. But anyways, that was actually somewhat of a short story. So I got the cooler. I get it home, I get it installed, and everything's good to go. So one of the reasons I like to go with Corsair is because this thing is going to switch over here. So one of the reasons I like to go with Corsair, this is the Ripper, by the way, is reliability for one, and number two, they have great software that allows you to control the pump and the fans. Now, you can't really do that in fact, you can't do that at all with the Cooler Master. You can control the fan somewhat through the BIOS on your motherboard, or if you maybe load up the AI suite, depending on whatever tuner you have for your motherboard, and control the fans that way. I mean, there's a bunch of different software packages, but I really like the software package that Corsair uses. And they used to use Corsair Link, but they have a new one which is called iQ. And this software is, in my opinion, it's pretty legit. You can actually set up different profiles, and you can do that in Corsair Link as well. But with this, which is really cool, is you can actually set programs to the profiles. For example, let's say I'm on my Ripper, and I got a good name for my Ripper, by the way, if I remember to tell you what I came up with at the end of the stream. So basically what you can do is, like, let's say I'm just browsing the web, and I want my fans to idle. Well, I set a profile for Chrome, and it will basically adjust the fan speed accordingly. However, if I'm going to be streaming, I want my fans to be, max, which is 2000 RPM, because I'm using the magnetic fans. And if I basically am clicked on or enabled onto OBS, it will load that profile. And switching back and forth is seamless. You don't have to, because originally what I wanted was to have hotkeys. This is actually a little bit better to a certain extent. It's not perfect. There are some other issues, like, for example, if I'm in a stream and I decide to pull up a web browser while in stream, it's going to go ahead and load the idle for Google Chrome. Now, idle's still got a fan curve on it, and it will go ahead and ramp up. But it's not so bad, because if I'm actually in a web browser, there's far less information than what it is when I'm actually gaming. So it'll still work out and be appropriate. But it would be nice to have it to where it's stuck to it at all times. But I don't want it to be running at full speed when I'm in Google Chrome either. So I haven't exactly worked out that detail. Now, the other thing is, let me see if I can get into like a profile here. Let me go into OBS. All right, so obviously I'm not going to go into everything about this program, because you guys got other things to do. You guys check it out on your own. There's other videos. But let me go into like performance. So in performance here, right now I've got it set to a fixed speed. So it will actually max out at a fixed speed. And of course I've got my pump set to extreme. And you can actually go through different, profiles. You can go, I made some, I have one for load, one for idle. Then there's quiet, which is default, balanced, extreme, and then 0 RPM. Since these fans have the ability to run at 2000 RPM, I'm going to prefer to do that whenever I am doing, like live streaming or rendering or anything like that that's intensive. And for you guys wondering, well, what about the fan noise and, wear and tear and dust and all that? I'll talk about that in just a minute, but I have a solution to that problem. But this software is legit. It works really nice. And another thing that I really like that would have saved me from that emergency shutdown when the AIO failed on the Cooler Master is it has a feature here that you can set a specific temperature, and if the system reaches that temperature, it will automatically shut down. You can set the temperature to whatever you want. I have mine set to 75. I can probably go as low as 72. Generally, under load with PBO, I usually hover right at 68. I've seen it actually hit 69 a couple of times, but it usually stabilizes at 68C. And then you can set how quickly you want it to shut down. Do you want it to shut down right away, or do you want a couple of seconds? I just went ahead and put mine on a 2-second interval. And most of my saving in Premiere and Photoshop is, it's got a pretty quick save. I would rather lose a little bit of work than do damage to my hardware. So I'm okay with this. And I have not had to take advantage of this feature yet since, I've switched over to the Corsair. Now, one of the reasons why I also originally wanted to go with the Cooler Master, aside from the single positive review and that Extreme Tech YouTube, is because it was a 360 rad. It was speculated by myself and others that it's more surface area to cool. However, OC3D TV did a review of the 280 Corsair cooler, the one that I have now. And he actually tested the difference between a 360 and the 280, and it was pretty much identical. He said the reason why is because of the magnetic fans that are being used in this, because they spin up to 2000 RPM. And I was kind of skeptical on that, but I got it, and sure enough, it does perform the same, which is pretty interesting. However, if they made a 360 rad and you use magnetic fans on that and you had push-pull, you would actually get even lower temperatures. Now, I did talk to a Corsair rep on Reddit. They have no plans of making a 360 version for Threadripper, so this is what we have to work with for now. If you are looking to get a liquid all-in-one cooler for your Threadripper, I highly recommend this unless you're going custom loop. I definitely recommend this. Corsair is legit. Again, I could have gotten a lemon, but if we go back to these reviews here, these reviews, I mean, there are several negative reviews, and all of them, like this last one here, the plastic mounts broke. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that the hoses on the Cooler Master were really stiff. It made it difficult to actually mount it. I was trying to be careful because I didn't want that to happen. Fortunately, I didn't break it in that manner, but Cooler Master probably needs to reevaluate. I based off what I'm seeing here, the Ernimax and the Cooler Master are kind of in the same category. If you want an all-in-one right now, it appears that Corsair, at the date of this stream, is the best way to go, aside from going with a custom loop. So, anyways, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in regards to the Corsair software and just talking about Corsair. I mean, there's a lot of other features in there, but that's not what this particular stream is about. If you guys have questions, you can hit me up towards the end of the stream, or you can come to my live stream and ask me whatever. Or you can also just do a YouTube search, and more likely you should be able to find whatever it is you're looking for. So now let's talk benchmarks, because that's what you guys came to see. You came to see overclocking results and things like that. So what we're going to do is, because this did not go as planned, unfortunately. It's not a big issue. I came up with a game plan tonight to do my best to deliver the same results as what you would have gotten had things gone to plan. What I mean by that is, I wanted to basically get it all put together, migrate it over, and do the overclocking video with just the base install of Windows, meaning no software, no third-party programs, just Windows and the updates. That's basically, when you go to a reviewer that's reviewing graphics cards or processors and things like that, they have a fresh install of Windows. So they don't have all these third-party programs running in the background. As if you look up at the top right, I've got a bunch of programs running, and of course if I open up Task Manager, I got a bunch of programs running because I've loaded all the software that I need in order for my system to run with what I need. In doing so, that drastically changes the performance measurements that you would normally see on a Cinebench score. It's not going to be the same as what you would normally see with just a base install, because the programs I run are probably not the same programs that you're going to run. In fact, you may not need the programs, so you may get better performance. Or you may need more, who knows? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reboot into safe mode. And safe mode is basically going to give us the results of what you would see from a Cinebench score on a clean, fresh install of Windows. This is stock. No PBO is enabled at this time. I'm going to show you both stock first, and then we're going to do PBO. And I'm also going to show you how to enable PBO. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot here. So just to give you guys a heads up on what we're going to be looking at here is Threadripper at stock is generally going to get a Cinebench score, and this is with a fresh install of Windows, no third party, is generally going to get a score roughly between 3150 and 3200. It could go up a little bit. You know, it's going to be a give or take a little bit here and there, but that's generally the score that you're going to be looking to get with Threadripper at stock. And with PBO enabled, you're generally going to get about 3400 to 3500, give or take. And okay, so let's get up in here. All right, so I'm going to open up Cinebench. I'm going to give it a second, let the temperature stabilize for a minute, because everything just came back up. So if I run the Cinebench score right now, it'll actually be somewhat low. Once the temperatures restabilize, everything will be good. Now, one thing I do want to mention, if you notice the scores, obviously on the right, you see some that are orange and you see some that are blue. The ones in orange are the ones that I've done in safe mode. The ones in blue are the ones I've done in your standard Windows environment, normal mode. Now, I have been able to get as high in safe mode as 3487 as far as an actual, that's with PBO, not with stock. That's PBO enabled. And with normal Windows, like going straight into Windows, no safe mode, the highest score I've gotten was 3464. Again, that's with PBO. So let's do a run. Again, this is stock here. And this will probably be, you know, like I said, right around 3200, give or take. And if I run 5 of these in a row, it'll roughly be about the same. Okay, so 3196. Let me open up the magnifier. Oh, I don't know if I can do magnifier on this. Okay, yeah, I can. It's not running that good. Okay, so 3196. Apologize, I forgot to set the magnifier up correctly. And that's typically what you're going to get if you do a fresh install of Windows and you do your benchmarks. There's other benchmarks you can run, but I didn't want to load up a bunch of junk software on my system just to see what benchmarks. And for what I'm going to be doing, I'm not really going to be gaming much on this system, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later after we go through the overclocking. But this is pretty much typical of what I've seen from reviewers on YouTube, professionals, and from what I've seen from just people in general on forums and whatnot. So that's a decent score. I'm not going to open up magnifier again. That thing's running kind of wonky. It could be because I'm in safe mode. So I'll run one more. See if we hit that 32. And I find that when you run Cinebench, you're generally going to get, you know, scores that fluctuate about 50 points. It's pretty large. I don't know why the scores, you know, will fluctuate that drastically, but they do. Okay, so we're still at 3196. We'll just call it 3200 for shits and grins. All right, now what we're going to do, we're going to go into normal Windows. But remember, this score is this score is going to drop when I go into normal Windows, and the reason why is because, like I said, I've got all my software programs installed. And the reason, I don't remember if I mentioned this or not, the reason I did it this way is, could I have done this live stream and did a fresh install of Windows and done it that way? Yes, I could have. The problem is, if I do that, it's going to set me back about 2 days because I've got to install Windows, then I've got to run the updates from Windows, and the install of Windows goes quick. It takes about an hour. But unfortunately, because of Microsoft and their genius idea of peer-to-peer updates, it takes forever to do updates on a fresh install of Windows. Now, if you're doing a refresh, that's different. But if you're doing a fresh install of Windows, it takes hours. So that would mean that that's a whole day pretty much knocked out. So then the next day, I would have to go and reinstall all my programs. Of course, after I did the overclocking stream, that would be initially the idea. But that's still 2 days of my time, and all that could have been avoided had the cooler not failed. So that was initially what I wanted to do. So if time wasn't an issue, it wouldn't have been a problem, but I'm still going to be able to give you at least the results that you would more likely be looking at by showing you safe mode as I did, and then also showing you what it's like with like all programs running as I'm doing here. In fact, you're actually getting more information because you're actually getting to see what the system would run like with without programs and with programs. So maybe that actually is a plus to see both sides. All right, so now we're going to open up Cinebench. Also, I couldn't do this in safe mode, but I've got some info here where you guys can see the GPU temp, the CPU temp, the VRM temp, load, clock speed, volts, and power. So this way you can have a little bit of information. I can't run that in safe mode because drivers aren't loaded. So let's see what kind of score we get here. Now this is going to be lower. I'm guessing it's probably going to be about 3050. Doubt it'll hit 3100. Just based off of how many times I've run the bench tests. Okay, so 3000. Okay, so that's somewhat normal of what I've been getting. At least it's usually like anywhere from 100 to 150 of, that's actually a lot less. It's almost 200 points. We'll give it a minute and then we'll run it again. Usually it gets a little bit higher than that. I did have one, when I did the test before, when I was going to test the stream tonight, I did have one that was, yeah. No, not this one. I had another one that was 2998 or something like that. And then after I do one more test, I'll open up hardware info, and then you guys can kind of see all the cores and how high it's boosting up. Because the difference in the temperatures that you're seeing and the voltages are drastically different than what you're going to get with PBO. Now, Robert Halleck, the technical rep from AMD, has specifically said that as AMD's Threadripper, or most of the chips of the Zen series, or the Zen architecture, you're safe to run it as high as 1.4 volts. You can go above that, but you wouldn't want to stay locked at 1.45 or higher. You'd want to stay like roughly at 1.4 or lower. My system usually with PBO enabled hovers around 1.36. It will maybe jump up to 1.4, but very rarely. So it's actually really, really safe, and it's pretty impressive how PBO works because it's more efficient than manual overclocking, and you don't need profiles. Like normally, if I was overclocking, let me use my gaming rig for example. So I have an Intel 8700K that I game on. Okay, when I'm gaming on that, like during the winter, I can boost it up to 5 gigahertz because the temperatures allow for it. But during the summer, I have to drop the overclock down to 4.8 because the temperatures just get too hot. So I have to have different profiles. And with PBO, you don't have to do that because it automatically compensates, the AI of the software automatically compensates, so you don't have to mess with that. It's less wear and tear on your hardware. It's more energy efficient. And you just enable it and forget about it. Unless you're using Ryzen Master, which we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, let's run another run here. Okay, so we got almost to 3100, just under. So I knew if we waited just a little bit, we'd get a little bit higher. All right, so the next thing we want to do, let's see here. All right, what we're going to go ahead and do, let me open up hardware info. And if you notice here, you want to look at the CPU T die. You can notice the low temps and the maximum temps, or current and max. Another thing is you can look at the V-core, which is our voltages. And again, this is stock, guys. We're getting maximum of 1.235, and the maximum, well, we haven't, this is maximum at idle. Once we go ahead and do the run, this obviously will change. And then as far as clock speeds, it's actually boosting pretty good right now. We're getting like up to 4 gigahertz. All right, so we'll go ahead and run this. And you notice the temperature, it'll go up to about 50 or 52, right around there. And the VRMs, you know, they're fine. It's only boosting to about 3.7. Okay, it did go up to 4. So we got the same score. Okay, the highest temperature we got was 48.1 C. Voltages, again, 1.256. So this, guys, this will give you kind of an idea of what stock offers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do PBO, but there's 2 ways to do it. I'm going to show you the Ryzen Master software way first, and then I'm going to tell you, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to tell you why I don't like it and why I prefer you do it the second way, which is through the BIOS. But we're going to go through the Ryzen Master software first. So what you want to do is you go into creator mode. And let's see here. All right, so current mode, let's see if you guys can even see it. You can't really see it, so let me, give me 1 second. Can't really see with my webcam in the way. I apologize, I'm having to do this on a 1080 display, so screen real estate isn't exactly the best. Okay, so if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, it says current. That's what, obviously, current settings that I'm running right now. And right now, it's set to auto. And then over here, to the right, is Precision Boost Overdrive. Now, you cannot edit the current through here. You have to go to creator mode. You go to creator mode. You click Precision Boost Overdrive, which was already clicked. Then after you do that, let me go ahead and maximize. I'll hide this. And you can do apply and test. We don't need to do that, not for PBO. If you were doing manual overclocking, then you might want to do that. And you click apply. Hit OK, and then it restarts. This is one reason why I don't like using PBO or enabling PBO through Ryzen Master software, because as soon as you enable it in the Ryzen Master software, you have to reboot as what it's doing now. It goes into Windows, and it says that it's PBO in the software, which we'll see when we open it back up, but it doesn't really perform any different than what the stock is. But let's say it did perform better as normal PBO. I still don't like it, because if you have to reboot or shut down your system, it gets disabled, and you have to go through this whole process again every time you want to enable PBO. And in all honesty, PBO is something that you just want to turn on and just forget about. You don't want to have to be messing with it. So that is the main reason why I don't particularly like the software, at least the Ryzen Master. Not that it's a bad software package, because it does have its uses, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I recommend going through the BIOS. Now, after we do these tests, then I'm going to show you how to enable PBO in the BIOS. I would say it's easy. It's easy if you know where to go. In my opinion, the ASUS BIOS is not very user-friendly. It's not intuitive at all. Okay, now, as you can see, let me move it over. We are on the current. Down, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, we're current. And PBO is enabled. And we are also still on dynamic. We're not messing with memory here. I'll talk about memory a little bit later, but right now we're just talking about the Ripper overclocking in general. Okay, so PBO is enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and close out Ryzen Master. There's no reason to run it. And let me go ahead and open up our panel. No, not that one. And I'll just give it a second here. Based on the history that I have tried, when I enabled PBO through the Ryzen Master software, I got the same results that I got for the most part when I was running stock. I have not updated Ryzen Master. I probably should have checked to see if there was an update, but this version I downloaded the week I got my Ripper, and I imagine that was about 2.5 weeks ago, going almost on 3 weeks. So I can't imagine they've done an overhaul of the software between now and then. But it's a possibility. All right, so let me go ahead and run it. And if you notice the temperatures, notice the clock speed and the voltages, it's still performing very much as if you were running stock. Yeah, we're getting the same score as if we were running stock. So, and yes, I am running it correctly because I thought, well, maybe it's not enabled. Maybe I did something wrong. Because I went online and I was talking to some other people, and that's when they all recommended as well just to do it through the BIOS. Unfortunately, trying to find it in the BIOS, as you will see in a moment, is, at least on the ASUS board, is not very good. Not for an average user. Hell, even if you're an experienced user, I still don't think the BIOS is very good. Because you have to go through all these screens just to get to the section where to enable PBO. Not good. I'm going to wait again, then I'm going to run it one more time. And then actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable PBO in the Ryzen Master software, reboot, show you guys that it is actually disabled. I'm not even going to go into safe mode because you can clearly see there's no change, so there's no point. All right, so after this, we will disable PBO in the Ryzen Master software. We will reboot, check to make sure it is disabled, and then we will reboot, go into the BIOS. Okay, same result. And in case you guys are wondering, because I did try this and watch it work now. I did try this with Ryzen Master Open with PBO, and it gave me the same result. But just so you guys can see it, we'll go ahead and leave it open and we'll run the benchmark again. Now watch it actually work this time and make me look like an idiot, because it didn't when I tried it before. So let's try it again. Because I thought, well, maybe Ryzen Master actually has to be open in order to get the enabling of PBO. But if you can see the temps, I can already tell, yeah, in fact, it went down by about 10 points. So it doesn't matter. The Ryzen Master software, and when you go to enable PBO, it just does not work. I don't know why. And again, it is active. I mean, it's current. It says Precision Boost Overdrive is enabled. I'm not really sure what the deal is, but again, I prefer to just go ahead and do it through the BIOS anyways, and which means you can pretty much uninstall this and not even mess with this. But before we go and do that, let me just mention one thing. If you enable PBO in the BIOS, as I'm about to do, or actually, let's say you wanted to do manual overclocking. Like you could theoretically, if you wanted to, enable PBO, find out where your temps, your voltages are with your current chip, and it'll give you like a starting point to where you could go in and start dialing in your manual overclocks. You'll pretty much get all the information you need except maybe load line calibration for your Vids. And you can just kind of play around with that a little bit and then start tweaking to where you could get, you know, a slightly higher boost clock than what PBO may offer. The problem with going with manual overclocking, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but I mean, it kind of is, because number one, you're using more power. Number two, it's more wear and tear on your silicon. And I mean, that may not matter to you. And generally people buying, you know, spending this much money on a system like this probably don't care. But this is not a system that I would normally build. I mean, this was a bit above my normal budget. You know, an 8700K is perfectly within my budget, but this is quite a bit more when you add up the motherboard, the RAM, and the processor. I mean, it was pretty expensive. The only reason I was able to work this out is because I was able to get those combo deals on Newegg. Otherwise, I probably would have had to go maybe first gen. So anyways, let me go ahead and get out of this. Oh, actually, I need to turn off PBO. I wanted to turn it off in the Ryzen Master software first before we go into the BIOS. So we will have to do another reboot. So we're going to set it back to auto. We're going to hit apply. It's going to want to reboot. So to reboot, it'll come back up. We'll check it again. Then we'll go into the BIOS and enable it. This is exactly why I also don't want to be using the Ryzen Master, because of all this rebooting. I don't even understand why anybody would want to be rebooting this much to access this feature. You go into the BIOS, you enable it, you forget about it, and it's always enabled. And I just want to say, because some of you guys may be wondering, like, well, is this dangerous for your hardware? Well, the beautiful thing about PBO, which I prefer over manual overclocking, is, like I said earlier, you don't need profiles. It's automatically going to adjust your SoC, your voltages, and your temps, and keep it within that parameter, as what was explained by Robert Halleck in that demonstration. And it does a damn good job. I mean, it seems perfect, almost too perfect. Kind of scary to even think about it when you start thinking of AI and all that. But it's so much more efficient than actually using or applying manual overclocking. In all honesty, I would love to see Intel incorporate something like this, because it would make most of our lives a lot easier. Because when you're doing manual overclocking, it takes forever to get to get your stable overclocks, because okay, so we are on auto, so you can see the current. The reason it got that error is because I had apparently it tried to open it twice. So we are current. It is back to auto, so we're good now. Now we can go into the BIOS and do it the right way. In my opinion, the only way you should be doing it. But it would be really cool if Intel would actually incorporate a similar system with their processors, because, like I said, you know, we've got 4 seasons, and where I live in South Texas, the temperatures during summer and winter are extreme. We get some brutal winters here, but we also have brutal summers too. And our fall and spring are the best times of the year, but once you start getting towards the ending or the beginning, or excuse me, the ending of spring and the beginning of fall, you're still getting roughly similar temperatures as what you would be getting during normal summer. So our summer temperatures range, I would say, from mid 90s up to the hundreds. And even if you have air conditioning, which obviously I've got air conditioning, it's still really hard on your ambient temps, which affect, you know, your overall temperatures for your system. Okay, I'm not going to be using the mouse too much in this because it's really laggy. It's always been that way. So I'm just going to just tab over. So we want to go over to, why is it doing that? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so we want to go over to advanced. I believe it's AMD CBS, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And so you go to advanced, AMD CBS, and then go to NBIO common options. Then you scroll down. I believe it's in here. Okay. And there it is, Precision Boost Overdrive Configuration. You go in there, and this is where it warns you about voiding your warranty if you enable it. So you just hit accept, and there it is. Precision Boost Overdrive, currently it is disabled. Just go into it, hit enable, and there you go. Then once you do that, escape out, save your changes, and reboot, and there you go. That's how you enable PBO in the BIOS on the ASUS board. Now, I can't really speak on the other boards like the MSI Meg Creation, which is the only other board, in my opinion, you should be using aside from the ASUS boards, because unfortunately the ASRocks and the Gigabyte boards, their VRMs are, for a lack of a better word, shit. So, yeah, if you're going to be doing Threadripper, you want to either be using the MSI Meg Creation or any of the MSI upper tier, or excuse me, any of the ASUS boards of the upper tier, meaning the Prime, the Strix, which is what I have here, or the Zenith board. The Zenith board is probably a little bit overkill because unless you're doing like 24 cores or 32 cores, then you might want to go ahead and go with that. But with 16 cores or 12 cores, you don't need to go that high. All right, let me get everything loaded up, and then we're gonna load up Ryzen Master so you guys can see that when I go into Ryzen Master, it's gonna actually show that PBO is enabled, which before we turned it off in the software, but now it's actually going to read correctly within the software because it's enabled in the BIOS. Now, there is a manual mode for PBO in the BIOS. It's possible, of course, you shouldn't be doing this or shouldn't have to be doing this, that the manual mode might need to be enabled in order for you to enable it and get it to work with the Ryzen Master software. But during my research, I didn't find any notes or tips that said to do that. So I have not messed with the manual mode, and in all honesty, I don't even know why it's there. So, all right, so we're going to open up Ryzen Master, and it will show with the current that it is actually does have PBO enabled, and there it is. So PBO is enabled, and we are on the current. So now, before I'm not gonna run any benchmarks on this. We're gonna go into safe mode, and we're gonna run a benchmark, a couple of them, in safe mode. This way, you guys can see what the results would be like with a base install of Windows. And then, of course, I'll do it with Windows as well. after we get all this discussed, I will talk a bit about the cooling modifications that I've done and what I plan to do going into summer, actually before summer. All right. I do not know why. Oh, I didn't need to do that. This is what I wanted to do. Now, if you guys remember, the score that we got in safe mode was roughly 3,200. We should get somewhere, I would say, it'll be 3,400 and possibly higher than that. So I'll launch it. I'll give it a second, let it restabilize because it just booted up. Like I said, the highest score I've gotten was 3,487. So that's what you'd be roughly looking to get from a fresh install of Windows. Now, what happens after you load all your programs and everything, that'll be different. But this, I'm not really like an overclocker to the point where I'm like doing competitions and things like that. This is just like to show you generally where you should be at if you have a Threadripper or you're getting a Threadripper like a 2950X. I bought this mainly for work and for live streaming. That's pretty much why I built this thing. And because of cost, holy shit, 3,507. I finally broke 3,500. That was the first time. Wow, and I even got that on stream. Cool. Yeah, I've been trying to get 3,500, but the highest that I've been able to get was 3,487. So nice, cool. Finally broke that 3,500. But again, like I don't compete. I'm not sitting here doing like liquid helium or LN2 or dry ice, overclocking. There are guys that do that. More power to them. It's just not for me. But at least you guys can get an idea of what the performance is going to be like. And part of the reason I'm also doing this is because, there are people that are just diehard Intel fanboys. And as I mentioned, and I believe I don't know if it's part 1 or whatever, I'm a fanboy with whatever's going to give me the best performance for the money. Let me say that again. The best performance for the money. Now, some of you are going to take that narrative one way or the other. But what I mean by that is if you go and look at benchmarks comparing the 2950X and you compare it to a Skylake X processor, any of the 7900s, only the top one, I think it's the 7960, beats this out. But that processor is like $1,900. It's twice the price of this. Now, granted, it beats it out by a pretty good jump. But all the other processors, which are not much cheaper than this, or excuse me, than the 7960X, they're like $1,500, $1,700. I can't really quote prices because they're changing all the time, especially with everything going on right now with Black Friday and all that. But you're going to pay, in order to get the same level of performance, you're going to end up paying nearly twice as much going with Intel. If for multi-core threaded applications, single core, that's a whole different ball game. These systems are not, if you need single core performance, then you probably want to go Intel. But if you need more multi-core performance, Threadripper, it is the best, especially when you consider how well it performs for the money you spend. I mean, the benchmarks don't lie. But there are people that they don't care. They prefer to sleep good at night knowing that they're using Intel. And again, I'm not a fanboy. I have an 8700K. I love it. It's a great gaming rig. And I went with it because, in my opinion, Intel is the best when it comes to gaming because of that single core high clock speed. Or not really single core, but the high clock speed that it's able to get and provide for gaming. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. All right, so let's do another run, and then we'll reboot. Now this score is going to drop quite a bit when we go into normal Windows. It'll probably drop to about 3,300. But it's a significant jump. Okay, still 35. All right, let's get out of here. Let's go into normal Windows. Yes, we do want to save that, because that was my best score. And in all honesty, I'll be glad to get this done because I've been having to hold off of really getting into, how should I say, tweaking my stream to get it where I want it to be, because I couldn't do that until I got this done. And I still want to do some stress tests because I was able to get the memory overclocked to 3133 because the memory kit that I bought is 2933, so I got a 200 megahertz boost off of that. But I need to run stress tests to make sure that it can handle it, which I have not had time for. But, and in all honesty, memory overclocking is simple if you're not going to be messing with the timings. But if you're going to go in and start messing with timings, that gets very complicated and very time consuming. I personally am not going to mess with that. I don't need to because, and again, we'll talk about memory a little bit later as to why, because unless you're gaming on a system like this quite a bit, you don't really need to be doing that. Okay, so after everything loads and our temperature stabilizes and everything, we will go ahead and we will do a Cinebench. So the temperatures right now, let's see, for the CPU, we're right at about 33. Now, remember, it's running a little warmer at idle than with PBO than it was with stock. If you remember, stock, I believe, today with the temperatures that we have, I believe was 29 to 30. And if you remember also, when we were boosting, running the benchmark, I believe the highest we got was 49. We're going to get to 68 with this, but we're going to get boosts probably about 4.2, somewhere around there. All right, let's see what we got, and then I'll after I run this, I'll open up Cinebench, or excuse me, hardware info, and then you guys can take a look at that. I'm thinking 3350. All right, we're almost at 68. There it is. So it'll top out at 68. So you don't have to worry about it. Yep, 3358. So I was pretty much on point. I thought I'd get about 3350, and I did. So now, mind you, it is cooler right now. During the summer, I'm not going to be running these benchmarks during the summer, but during the summer, I'm not going to get the same performance unless I modify my cooling, which I plan to do, which I'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, let me open up hardware info. Let me let the temperatures restabilize. Oh, it looks like it already is. All right, let me reset. Okay, so the maximum, I really wish this would. Okay, all right, let's try it again. And you can look at the boost clocks, look at the temperatures, and the VRMs. And you can also, pretty much what you're seeing here is what's being repeated over here. There's very little variance. This is IDA64 and this is hardware info. And again, we'll top out at 68 degrees Celsius. And the V-Core, let's see, it did get to 1.42, but we're kind of averaging right around 1.36. Same score, 3358. And our maximum boost clock, 4.174, which we can say 4.2. So again, pretty much on point with what I mentioned. So you guys can see the difference between your stock performance and PBO. If I do manual overclocking, I'm not really going to get much better than this. Let me do this. Let me bring up Jared's tech, because some of you may not watch part 4 of what of the video that I had. Because I did actually show the benchmark scores of manual and PBO in there. So give me just one moment while I pull up his video. I'm not going to play the whole video, but I will show the benchmark scores. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is Jared Tech's channel, and he's got a video here. And if you notice the top one, he was able to overclock a manual overclock of 4.15, and his score that he got, again, this is with a base fresh installed Windows. He doesn't have a bunch of programs running like what we're running here. And he got 3523. So I just broke 3507. Again, he also did these scores in the winter. Now, I don't know what, he's an Aussie, so I don't know what Australia's winters are like. I mean, you know, I'm not familiar, but I'd imagine they're cold as well, so it's probably comparable to what we might be even getting here. I really don't know, to be honest. But if you look at PBO, the score, I mean, is negligible. I mean, that isn't really much of a difference, and especially when PBO, or excuse me, when Cinebench, the Cinebench scores fluctuate so much. So doing a manual overclock, again, is just more wear and tear on your silicon. It's eating more power. You know, and then on top of that, depending on where you live, you may have extreme climate changes, which I do, which means I have to have multiple profiles for different overclocks. Like I mentioned, my 8700K, I have to have different profiles. Right now, because we're in winter, I can run it at 5 gigahertz. Come summer, I'm going to have to drop it to 4.8. It's just too hot. That's why I wish Intel would adopt similar technology like what AMD's come up with their PBO software technology, because this is amazing. This is one of the reasons why I went with the second gen, because first gen doesn't have this feature. So let me run one more, and then I think after this, let's see. Okay, after this, we'll talk to you guys. Yeah, same score. So yeah, yeah, it's awesome. So I want to talk to you guys now more about cooling. Let me see if I can bring this up for you guys. So I decided that I'm going to kind of go ham with my cooling because of where I live, you know. And I decided, Steve from Hardware Unboxed was recommending that he had a quote in one of his videos when he was doing the review on the Zenith Asus board. I have the Strix, but they're pretty much the same as far as the VRMs. And he was saying that he wished ASUS would get rid of that stupid shroud. Those were his words, which were funny, by the way, to allow for better cooling. So I have done exactly that. I removed the shroud. And, of course, this is just the cable for the RGB. And what I did is I installed a 90 millimeter fan right on the heat pipe and the vents where it blows air right out the rear AIO or the rear IO. I originally had the fan on top of the block, but I don't need it anymore because I've got more fans that I've actually installed in the front blowing right on it. So my VRMs are cool. VRM temperatures will not be an issue. So even during summer, at least with this. Now, if I'd have left this on and left that tiny little fan that, if you notice down here, this little fan, it's not even 40 millimeter. I thought it was. It's smaller than that. I don't know what size it is. I guess 30. And this thing only turns on, I guess, when triggered. It's not on all the time. I guess that's more efficient anyways. But it's not really going to do much. So putting this 90 on there, I mean, you can clearly see from the temperatures, from what I was getting. I mean, my VRMs are 28 degrees C, and I don't recall what the top was, but it didn't even get to 50. Okay, and most VRMs that are taking serious load usually get up to 70, 80 degrees. You know, so anyways, here's a better shot, or another shot, that just kind of shows from an angle of and mounting it was not easy because I just used some zip ties. I screwed in some screws into the rad for my water cooler for the video card, and I just zip tied it onto there. It's holding on good, so it works. And I didn't need to go push-pull with my graphics card because I'm not going to be gaming on this system, but I do need to go push-pull on my gaming rig because, you know, it gets pretty toasty. So what I did as far as the IO is I decided to remove the IO so that way the fan that's blowing that air, the air has a place to go. Otherwise it's just blowing and it's going to create hot pockets and vortexes. And you don't want that because then it's just going to be like being in a sauna or something. Well, maybe not really like a sauna, but it's not going to really work the best as efficiently. So what I decided to do is I took a filter, PC filter, and I cut a section off, and then I cut out the holes to mimic the layout of the IO. But before I did that, I wasn't sure if it was metal or plastic because it's pretty rigid, and it could pass for metal. So what I did is I went outside, I took a scrap piece, and I took a lighter, and I lit it to make sure it was going to melt, and make sure it wasn't metal because I didn't want to use metal because, you know, I don't want it to making contact with the board and shorting out the board in any way. Because the IO shield isn't there, and if it makes contact with something on accident, possible something could get shorted. It is not metal. It was in fact some sort of plastic. And the other concern was, is it going to be able to hold up with the temperatures? Because that IO, that rear IO, where all your USB ports plug in, it can get pretty warm. Not to mention, the VRM, I got all that air blowing through there. But because that fan is on there, even though it's blowing hot air, at least it's airflow, so it's better than nothing. So anyways, I cut that out, removed the IO shield, and that's without the IO shield, and this is with the new one. So now that fan that you saw earlier that's blowing air directly through the heat pipes and the fins, all that hot air is coming right out the back. It's fantastic. So my VRMs are cool. Now, I still have, I don't want to say cooling problems, but I want to prepare for summer as best I can, because when my setup that I had before, I was running Skynet, which was a 6700K, and I was running my gaming rig, which is 8700K, and it got pretty toasty. I don't remember if I showed you guys, but my temperatures were getting as high as 91. I don't think I did, so let me do that now. Okay, if you look on the bottom, let's see, right, it says 91.6 degrees. Okay. During the summer, if I'm working or I'm streaming, meaning I've got both my systems running, that's how hot that server room gets. It gets toasty. So now obviously the equipment's pretty cool. The temperatures are okay, but there's definitely room for improvement. So knowing that, I didn't do any diagrams, but I decided, well, before I get into that, I did add an extra fan in the system. So I did a diagram, for, cutting out a hole. This is in the back part of where the PSU is. And then I was able to clean up the PSU wires to where there's plenty of airflow. I cut it out, cleaned it up a bit, and then I installed a fan. It's not very pretty, but it works. I don't know if I'm going to use this or not, but it's there if I need it. Right now, I'm still waiting on whether or not I'm going to utilize that because I actually had to change things up a bit. But anyways, I modded my fans as far as the layout inside the case. Now, I did all of this when I had to tear the Ripper apart again because of that AIO failing. 1 second. Damn, I'm already losing my voice. Well, at least I got through most of it. This cough drop should help a bit. Okay. Much better. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. All right. So, what I needed to do, or what I wanted to do, is I pulled off, I'm going to show you my server rack in just a second, but I pulled off all my fans from the server rack for a couple reasons. Number one, they run all the time. I do have a switch on them, but it got annoying turning them on and off every single time I wanted to use either my gaming rig or my streaming rig or both at the same time. So I just left it on. I don't like that because it's a waste of power. It's also blowing air into the systems even when they're not being utilized, which is more dust buildup. Don't like that. Not to mention, as far as aesthetics, it looked kind of messy. It's not absolutely terrible, you'll see in a moment, but I didn't really care for it. The other thing is, with the new magnetic fans that I'm going to be installing, they spin up to 2,000 RPM. Now, some of you are probably wondering, well, that's going to be really loud. Yes and no. Allow me to explain. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the Corsair magnetic fans, they're magnetized. So once they're activated, they're not like your traditional case fans like these, where they have ball bearings and there's friction. So a lot of the times when you've got fan noise, there's two things that are causing the fan noise. Friction from the ball bearings of the fan spinning and the air as it passes through the fan blades. The air that's passing through the fan blades with the current design of fan blades as they are, that sound, we don't have a design yet that is able to mitigate that sound completely or drastically reduce it. But with the magnetic fans that Corsair has, they pretty much are able to completely mitigate all the friction and the sound created from it. So they are quieter, which is great. And this will basically allow two things. I'll be able to run more air through there, which will be even cooler, and I'll be able to control the fans. And when the systems are not running, obviously they'll be off instead of running all the time as I originally had it set. I know some of you are like, well, you shouldn't have done that to begin with. Yeah, I agree. Wasn't exactly the smartest thing, but I just got lazy turning that switch on and off all the time. Now I won't have to do that. I haven't ordered the kit yet. I'll probably be ordering because I have this whole kit of fans and all this stuff that I need in order to basically overhaul the cooling. This is the server rack. This was before. I had 6 140 millimeter fans, and I had a filter. They were all mounted to the front door, and then of course all the wires. It's kind of messy, but that's what I was originally using, and it worked good. But it could be a lot better. In fact, I'm already seeing an improvement since I removed those, because the fans I'm using now are giving even better airflow. This is another angle just from the front. Now, for those of you wondering, when I was mentioning, or as far as the sound and the heat, it gets, like I said, it gets up to about 91 degrees in the server room. Well, a few years ago, I got really tired of being in the same room that I'm working in or gaming in because of the heat. Living in South Texas, it gets pretty hot. It got so bad, I would literally take my shirt off because I'd be sweating. And yes, I would be running the air conditioner, but it would just be getting so ridiculously hot. Again, this is peak of summer. So I was just like, I need to come up with a way to mitigate this, because it's just extremely uncomfortable, regardless of whatever my air conditioning I was running at. And yes, I could run it lower, but then my air conditioning bill is through the fucking roof. So what I came up with was a way to where I could have my systems in its own room, and then my work room, I run all my cords for my peripherals and my monitors, my displays, to each room. Now, some of you are probably wondering, well, how the hell can you do that? Because, cables can only go so far. Well, let me tell you, that has been the biggest challenge to get to work. But I did get it working. So if any of you ever need any advice on how to set something like this up, I pretty much know the exact cables you need to buy that will allow you to get everything to work. And I'll proceed forward to show you basically how this all works. So what I did was, let me skip past this. This is before Threadripper. This is an older system setup. So what I did is, let me go back to this. Okay, if you look on the left where the fans are, the door with the fans, it's leaning up against my dishwasher. Okay. Now this is my kitchen. I know it sucks. It's kind of small, but it's not too bad. So basically what I did is I pulled out the dishwasher, and you can't really see too well in this shot, but I basically cut a hole in the wall about 3 by 2. And I ran all my core cables through the wall. And then the dishwasher, I completely disconnected. And I made sure that the water was turned off. So that way, if there's a leak or anything like that, basically the dishwasher is not being used at all. And yes, I'm pretty efficient when I wash my dishes, even though I wash by hand. I'm a bachelor, so I have ways of doing that. So I run the cables into the studio, which is this room here. So when I'm working, this is my studio space. This is where I work, do my thing or whatever. Now, for my game room, this is a front view. To the left is what I just showed you. This cubby hole here where the dishwasher would go. And it has its own power outlet with its own breaker, which is great. So it's not going to trip if, like, let's say I have another, I'm overloading the breakers or whatever. That breaker will not trip. I also have a 1500 watt battery backup. So I protect my shit. And we'll talk about water in just a second in case you guys are wondering, what if you have a leak? I thought of that too. So this is the front angle and the wires coming from the left and the right. This is the right, and another hole is cut going through the wall. That goes to the game room. And I'll show you just a quick picture of the game room. It's been changed slightly since then, but for the most part, still the same. That is the dishwasher as I'm going to put it back in. This is the server rack. It is lifted 2 inches off the ground. It is mounted to the ground. I have some steel beams that basically screw into the floorboard, basically just to prevent from, not necessarily to prevent theft, but to deter it. Let's be real, anybody that really wants to steal something, if they put the time into it, they can get it. But generally speaking, I basically put this in to slow them down. And I can tell you right now, most thieves, when they break into a residence, they want to be in and out as quickly as possible. Now, I have also some other security measures in place. I will not talk about those. That also help. So I like to protect my shit. Now, I said earlier that this server rack is actually sitting 2 inches above the ground, and it's sitting on steel beams and locked into those mounted to the floor. The reason why I've done that is also my cables. Now, right now, they're loose and they're on the ground, but when everything's plugged in, no power cords, nothing is touching the ground, and is at minimum 2 inches above the ground. I did that because I do have a sink, obviously my kitchen. The dishwasher is turned off. There's no hoses connected, so I don't have to worry about any water leakage there. But let's say I did have a leak, plumbing leak or something like that. That's fine. I'm still okay with that because the way I've set this up, there's literally no way any of the power cords or anything from my equipment will ever touch water, because it would have to go above 2 inches. And that's just not going to happen because all the water would flow out throughout the rest of the residence. So, not that I've ever had a flood, but, I wanted to think about that too, because that could just end up wiping everything out. But that doesn't cover the AIO install, because if the AIO busts or something like that, knock on wood, then, of course, then I'd be screwed. Maybe, maybe not. So moving forward. This is inside the cubby hole, going to the game room. This has been changed. This is the old setup that I had. I had on the right, I had a little subwoofer for the kitchen speakers, and I had my NAS. Battery backup is on the lower left, and then above that, I have my router. Due to heat issues, well, it actually was fine. There were no heat issues with that, but to cut down on the heat, in the server room, kitchen, whatever you want to call it, I decided to remove those and move them to another part of the residence to basically reduce the heat, and it did. It lowered it by, well, I did that, and I also removed a countertop that I was using, and it lowered the temperatures by 3 degrees. So that's a big help. These are some of the wires and how they run. Again, this wasn't finalized. This was just kind of like just testing things out as I was putting it together. Again, this is a photograph that I took testing. That is Ripper. The Ripper's in there, and then my game rig above that, it's turned off right now. Yes, there are a couple wires right now that are somewhat touching the ground, but those are just sitting there. They're not connected to anything at the moment. Because I'm still trying to play around with how I'm going to do some of the wiring just to keep everything somewhat clean. But yeah, it's pretty secure. And then of course the server rack door is on, and I close it. It's got the filter, and then I can lock it, and it's good to go. So I do have 2 fans blowing up from the top. That's why if you look at the top, there's kind of like that bow with the filter. You can't even tell it's really a filter, but it just kind of helps exit some of that hot air out. But before, I actually had a countertop above the server rack, and because I needed extra counter space, but it was creating a bit of a hot pocket, which is why temperatures were getting to 91. As soon as I removed that, and I removed the router, the subwoofer didn't matter, and the NAS, it dropped it by 3 degrees. So I was getting 91 during the summer. It would probably drop it down to about 89. 88, 89, somewhere around there, which every little bit helps. Every little corner that you can shave off to improve performance, I'm definitely going for. The next thing I'm going to do, before we get into that, the next thing I want to do is I have an air conditioning vent in my kitchen. So I went to Home Depot the other day, and I was talking to one of the reps there, and I was asking him about air conditioning ducting that basically buy and run from the vent and run it all the way to my server and have cool air actually blowing into my system, so that way I'm getting nice cool air directly going in, which will also, I would imagine, it would probably drop the temperatures probably down to, my guess, at least 85. As far as the ambient temperature. So I should be able to go from 91 degrees that I have here down to 85 should I install that air conditioning, ducting and whatnot. And of course, I'm going to be adding the fan. I call it a kit, but it's like a kit of fans that I've put together. And I'm also going to be using the, I forgot to mention this, the ICU software that I talked about before. It is not compatible with the Corsair Commander Mini, which is what I'm using in my Ripper right now. You have to use the Commander Pro in order to control your fans. Now, the fans that I have right now are being controlled from the actual cooler. That works. But all the other fans that I plan to add, I have to get the Commander Pro in order for it to be able to be controlled. So just in case you guys are looking to do something similar, you have to get that device. You don't have to buy it. There are other software packages out there. They're not as good in my opinion, but they will work and you don't have to buy the hardware. But if you want something nice and simple, has a nice UI, it has all these other features like the automatic shutdown and RGB and profiles and profile switching, I feel it's worth it. Because there's another one, Jay's 2 Cents did a review on some software package. I forget the name of it, but it's a fan controlling software. It's just not very intuitive. It does work and it works well, but it's a bitch to set up and it's not the most intuitive. But if you're looking to save money, you could go that route. So this is my game room, and it's changed since then. Not much. Well, I guess kind of quite a bit. I mentioned I was going to wait to talk about my Black Friday deal that I got. So I guess I could talk a little bit about it since we're talking about the game room. So the big screen on the left was a 60-inch HDR Samsung TV. But it wasn't true HDR. It was only an 8-bit panel. And I don't even recall what the nits were on it. If it were my guess, it's probably like 500 or something like that. So that is the main screen that I use for playing games at 60 FPS, either on my PC or on my PlayStation. So I do 4K 60 FPS on that screen and whatever HDR I can get out of that screen. That's what I was using. The screen on the right is just a 40-inch 4K that I use for just all my extra little windows and whatnot when I'm doing Premiere or Photoshop or live streaming, things like that. The screen that's kind of in the center that's real small, that I use to monitor my temperatures, clock speeds, and I also use it for doing annotations on live streams. So that way, if I'm trying to explain something to a viewer or something like that, I can actually draw on the screen and, illustrate better what I'm trying to communicate to the viewers. And then, of course, to the right of that, I got my Stream Deck, but I've got it oriented at more of a portrait instead of landscape, which works better as far as space for me with that setup. Now, here's where some changes I have made. Now, I mentioned earlier that I've got all those wires coming from the server room, both going to the studio, which is where I'm at now, and my game room, which is this right here. But for those of you who may or may not be aware, if you're running HDMI, HDMI right now tops out at 60 FPS. So you're not going to be able to game any faster than 60 FPS regardless of whatever HDMI cable you're using. So you can pretty much go as far as cable length using certified HDMI cables, and there's a bunch of different kinds. You can even try optical if you want. If you stick within 25 feet or less, I think you can go as high as 35, but I try to stick to right around 25 or less. You'll be able to get full HDR, 60 FPS, no problem, going to your displays from your PC. So if you're doing something like what I'm doing, and you got your systems in another room to cut down on heat and noise, that will work. Now, in order to do all my peripherals, I had to get, I believe they're called active USB cables, both USB 2 and USB 3, which basically allow me to run 15-foot cables to my peripherals in both rooms. And they work perfectly fine, no issues. One challenge, though, that I had was getting my 4K web camera to work because it's a Type-C. Fortunately, they sell a Type-C 3.1 by pluggable cable. They have a 15-foot and they have a 32-foot. Now, I actually went 32 because I thought I was really going to need that. The 32-foot worked. It allows me to run, either 4K at 30 FPS or 1080p at 60 FPS, which is what the camera is, what it would normally run at if you ran a 6-foot cable. So that's how I was able to pull that off. The next challenge was, I was doing this before, but before I'm getting into my gaming monitor because I had a ultra wide Acer X34 Predator G-Sync gaming monitor, but I had it here in the studio, and from here to the server room, I was able to run a 10-foot cable. So I was able to get the full 100 FPS at 3440 by 1440p, but it was only, it was 10 feet. And it was bare. I mean, I really had to set this thing up to where it would work because it's in another room. So I had to go through the wall. And that 10 feet, boy, you're really counting inches when you're trying to game from another room like that. But you have to, because of the bandwidth limitations of DisplayPort 1.2, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is 18.9 gigabits per second, you have that limitation. And if you go with a longer cable, you run the risk of starting to lose information, and it won't even run at the proper refresh rate that you may want to run at. Now, I ended up selling my ultra-wide gaming monitor, the X34, about 3 or 4 months ago, and I decided to just get a standard G-Sync display. I broke even, fortunately. I was able to sell it and get the exact amount of money I needed in order to get me a standard G-Sync gaming monitor. I ended up going with the Asus, the IPS, which does the 165 hertz, which 165 FPS. But I wanted to be able to game with it in the game room, and I wasn't too sure that would work because the distance that I need to travel from the server room to the game room, I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But I was able to pull it off, and I was able to, I had to go with a 15-foot cable. I didn't think it would work because of what I had researched on the bandwidth limitations as I was talking about. Fortunately, it did work. I bought a 15-foot cable. I connected it, tested it. It worked perfect. And I can do 165 FPS, which means if I wanted to, I'm not going to do this because I'm not an esports gamer like some of my clients. What I could have done or could do is get a BenQ with dynamic and run it at 1080p, 240 frames per second. If I wanted to do that, I still could do that. I'm not going to do that. So if you guys are wondering, can you go up to 15 feet? Yes, you can. But I don't want to say that you need a special cable, but there are companies out there that make good quality cables and some that are not so good. I use the one from Cable Matters, and I've had no problems with them at all. I do want to point out one thing. If you get a Cable Matters cable of 15 feet, you can't go above 15 feet currently until you start getting into DisplayPort 1.4, which currently is only available on the 4K displays. Personally, I feel it's a waste to be trying to game at 4K, 140 FPS or higher, whatever, on a tiny screen like that. It's just the sweet spot for a 27-inch monitor, or roughly about that, is 1440p. Anyways, the bandwidth that you get from that is higher because on the 4K displays, because they do have the 1.4 display port as opposed to 1.2. I forget what the bandwidth is on it, but it's absurdly high, and the reason why is because it's got to be able to do 4K along with HDR and things like that. Furthermore, those displays are also generally equipped with HDMI 2.0. Really not a big deal. It's not really going to be that much of a benefit. It won't become a benefit until you start to get into HDMI 2.1. So, in all honesty, if any of you have been eyeballing the 4K monitors with G-Sync and HDR, I highly recommend you do not buy them. Wait for the second generation when they start offering HDMI 2.1 and they fix some of the problems, because there's bandwidth limitation problems with those monitors that they're not able to do 144 FPS with HDR enabled. The fastest they can do is 98 frames per second with HDR enabled. I know, I looked into it because I was actually considering buying it as opposed to getting a 1440p. But I also didn't really want it because I didn't feel that the 4K display on a 27-inch screen is just murder on my eyes. And 1440p I really felt is the sweet spot. And I've talked with a few other people and looked at a lot of other reviews, and there's kind of a general consensus for a 27-inch monitor, 1440p is the sweet spot. So that's how. So the other modification that you're not seeing in this picture here is I've got my gaming monitor. If you notice, I got the keyboard there and it's on an arm. I don't know how well you can see the arm there. I actually modified the arm a bit, so I actually mounted the gaming monitor on an arm connected to that. So now I can move the monitor and be sitting in my chair and game right there, either on my 1440p, 144 frame or 160 frames per second, or I can, disable that monitor, move it out of the way, and game at 4K, 60 FPS. So generally, more often than not, if it's a single player game, especially if it's on console, I'll be, doing HDR content gaming at 60 FPS on the big screen TV. If it's games that I cannot get HDR for and I want a higher FPS, or if it's a multiplayer game, I use the gaming monitor and go that route. Now, I mentioned earlier that, so that's one modification that I have. I've got my gaming monitor in there now. The other modification that I've done that I mentioned earlier about how I said I had a great Black Friday is I went into Black Friday to Best Buy looking for a 4K display for my studio. Because I saw one that was roughly about $330, and I thought, yeah, maybe I'll go ahead and pick me up a 4K for the studio because I'm still running 1080p. And I had researched the QLED Samsung TVs for a while, and I was pretty set on getting the 9F. But I was set, but not really, because I wasn't going to spend $3,500 on a TV. It was just really out of my price range for what I was willing to spend. So I went in there, and obviously it's Black Friday, and they had the 6F 65-inch and the 8F and of course the 9F. And I was looking at the 6F, and I actually started talking to an actual manager, which was great because his product knowledge was through the roof. The guy talked my ear off for probably a good hour, and I was just sitting there being a sponge, just having him fill in what I didn't already know from my own personal research on the technology of the QLED TVs from Samsung. Long story short, because I can't regurgitate everything that he spilled out on me, you've got the 6F, the 8F, and the 9F. The 6F is kind of like, if I can use an analogy here that maybe some of you will understand, is kind of like getting the AMD 2200G processor. Okay, it's a good processor and you can game on it because it's got its own APU. You don't need a graphics card, but it's not really the, that great. It's kind of, it's not the best, most powerful, but it does a good job. Again, this is not the best analogy. Then the 8F is like the 8700K. It's drastically improved, has amazing specs and performance, and is pretty much an all-arounder great model to get. The 9F is kind of like the 9900K Intel processor, and comparing that to the 8700K. It's a huge price difference for a negligible amount of performance increase. So at that point, I was kind of like, well, I had money saved up and I was trying to decide, do I go the 6F or do I go with the 8F? Well, I decided to go ahead and go with the 8F, but unfortunately, by the time I went ahead and got some of my savings that I had stashed into the bank, I got back. He was actually supposed to be holding one. They had sold out. I wasn't mad because, I kind of felt guilty because I was just like, I just built my Threadripper. My Christmas had already come early. I don't really need to be spending any more money, but I did still have some money saved. And I was just like, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. Fuck it. And I even told him that, and he's like, well, hold on. We might be able to do something for you. So they were going to try to order me one and just do a back order, and I'd have to maybe wait 2 weeks. Well, it turns out, and part of the reason why I was also going to get it at Best Buy, because there's other places that have it, and one of the reasons I wanted to get it there is because the warranty is pretty good. It's local, and I didn't want to be dealing with Squarespace for something like that, even though I have in the past, and not that they're bad, because they seem to be legit. But also, I really wanted to get, I didn't really want to be ordering a TV online. I would prefer to get it locally. Something of that size. So, anyways, they were going to try to back order me one. And they told me that if they did, that even though if they back ordered, there was a slight chance that they may not hold it at that price. And they kept having problems trying to submit the order. It was just a big old mess. Well, long story short, I wasn't going to get that display. So, I was just like, whatever. And I told the guy, I shook his hand, I said, look, man, thank you for trying. I appreciate it. And then he's like, he went into the computer and he was trying to see if another store had it. And another store looked like they had one, but he wasn't able to get through. But while he was looking, he noticed that they had an open box. And they actually had it in the store. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, ooh, I would never buy a TV as an open box. That's kind of how I felt. It's not really something, it's kind of like a used condom. It's not really something you want to be like buying, But the guy, he took me over, he showed it to me, and normally the 8F is $3,000. Normally. The Black Friday deal brought it down to $2,400 before taxes. After taxes, it was like going to be like $2,550, something like that, or $2,600. So it was probably down, by about $500, $600, somewhere around there, if I bought it new. Well, they had an open box, and again, like I was kind of frowning on that idea. And the open box was selling for $1,900. And I asked him, I was like, I actually did buy an open box TV years and years ago. It was actually one of my first LCD flat panel LCD screens that I bought, because I bought one brand new and I wanted another one just like it, but they were out and they had an open box. So I went ahead and bought it, and then I just got the warranty with it. And that TV, I used that TV for 8 years and it never went out. In fact, I sold it to my uncle and he still has it today and it's still working. And now it's already 10, 11 years old and it's still working. It's amazing. But anyways, I asked him, like, you know, who had it and what was its backstory. Turns out that this particular display, the one that was the open box they were going to be selling, was supposed to be a floor model, and they hadn't actually put it up for display, to show off because they didn't have room. And a customer was actually going to buy it, but then they opened it up. They started to actually, like, I guess, demo it or whatever, but the customer changed their mind. So they went ahead and mounted it anyways, and they left it, as a demo model. So it never left the store. It's always been inside the store. And for the most part, I will admit, and one of the concerns I had was, well, it's been running for 2 or 3 weeks, nonstop. But they do turn them off at night. They don't let them run all night or anything, and they don't even run them all day. They actually, most of the time they do, but for the most part, they'll kind of rotate them. Because I was a little concerned about, well, how much life have I lost after that 2 or 3 weeks? But it's actually not that bad. So he was starting to get me kind of sold on it, but I was still kind of like, I don't know. So he told me what he would do is, because of all the problems that, kind of falling through, and because he was trying to get me a new one, he was going to knock off another $100 and bring it down to $1,800. And at that point, I was just like, well, I was going to end up spending, if I did get the brand new one, $2,400 plus whatever the tax was. So it's probably going to be like close to $26,000 once I got out the door. And that was going to be with no warranty. That was just the basic, standard Samsung year warranty. I asked him, I was like, well, how much is the Geek Squad warranty, and what does it cover? So basically, long story short, it was $200 for a 2-year additional warranty. And I can extend it if I choose to. I don't know what the cost is to extend it to 4 years, and I'm thinking about doing that. And it covers everything. They'll come and pick it up. They'll repair it. They'll order the parts, whatever. They take care of everything, provided it's all, happens within that time period. And that would be $200. So basically, I'd get the TV for $1,800, the warranty for $200, and then whatever the tax was. I took it. So now I have a 65-inch 8F QLED 10-bit 1000-nit HDR gaming TV. Well, it's not just for gaming, but yeah. So I have the display that I've been wanting for a long time. I mean, I did want the 9F, but he told me, like, the main difference between the 8F and the 9F is I'm trying to remember the terminology that he used, but there's basically these backlight sensors, if you will, and they're different sizes. And the 6F are really big. I don't remember how big they are. And then the 8F are obviously a lot smaller, more compact, and then the 9F are even smaller. But like he said, and he even showed me, because I looked at both of the displays, and my eyes, I'm not saying y'all's eyes wouldn't be able to see it, like if any of y'all go to look at it, but my eyes really couldn't tell the difference between the 8F and the 9F. However, when it came to the 6F and the 8F, I could tell a difference. So it's kind of like if you look at 30 FPS versus 60 FPS, there's a big difference. That's probably a better analogy. But if you go from 60 FPS to 90 FPS, you'll notice a difference, but it's not as big as going from 30 to 60. I probably should have gone with that analogy. So yeah, I now have this, and it's a bigger screen too. I didn't really need a bigger screen. I'd have been content with 60. I even thought about going 55. But yeah, it's this display, I shit you not. I loaded up Horizon Zero Dawn, got all I got it calibrated and everything, enabled the 4x4x4 chroma, full HDR, loaded up Horizon Zero Dawn, and I shit you not, I jizzed my fucking pants. It is fucking gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. I have not really had a chance to really play. I just loaded it up just to run around, just to see what it's like. I haven't, I've been pretty busy with work and all this stuff, but I'm hoping to finish all this stuff because I still got some other things I need to do in the game room. and then I got to do some more performance tests with the live stream. I don't know if I'll get to streaming this weekend. Well, actually, yeah, I probably will, because it's Monday. So if I do my scheduling right, I'm hoping I might be able to get to streaming this weekend. That would be great. But I think that's pretty much the majority of what I wanted to cover. Actually, I did want to cover, I should have done this before I talked about all that, but I actually should have talked a bit about the memory in regards to Threadripper, because I'm using the 2933. I did talk about that I was able to overclock and get it to 3133. And let me pull up, let's see. I'm going to pull up a benchmark vid, if it'll pull up here. Okay, there we go. All right. If you guys go to Hardware Unboxed and you pull up this video, Make Your Ryzen CPU Faster, Memory Tuning Performance, Massive Gaming Gains. Keywords, massive gaming gains. Now this, I should have talked about this before my Black Friday thing. I apologize. I had it in the notes, but I completely forgot. But if you are going to be using a Threadripper for production, like 100% of the time, you're not really going to be doing any gaming. Kind of where I fall. I'm not really going to be gaming on my Threadripper. I've got a dedicated gaming rig for that. Then you do not really need to spend a bunch of money on this high-end fast speed RAM. You don't really need it. And that's why I brought up this video, so you can just briefly see the benchmarks. But I recommend you going and watching the video, because if you notice the difference in the this is memory bandwidth, so that's not really going to matter. But let's look at the Cinebench, for example. Okay, so we've got the Cinebench score here, and if you notice, and this is not Threadripper, but it's the same architecture, same principle applies. If you notice here, we've got memory speed of 3400 and 3200, and I don't know if this is stock or whatever, but if you notice the benchmark scores for Cinebench, and this would be considered production, there's no difference, there's no performance gained by going with faster RAM. Now, does this apply to all production programs? No. I would recommend researching your program that you utilize and try to find out for yourself. But for the most part, I can tell you I've researched mine, and I'm mostly using like Premiere, Photoshop, OBS, and not saying that the RAM wouldn't help, faster RAM wouldn't help, but it's not a significant performance gain as what like you would be seeing for gaming. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, the reason why I'm bringing this up, and let me go back into my wish list here, is to basically talk about RAM, because let's be real here, the RAM for Threadripper is not cheap. You know, just for the 2933 32 gig kit that I acquired, which is out of stock at the moment, was right at $400. You know, I was not expecting to have to spend that much for my memory kit for this build. That was, you know, that was an unexpected expense that popped up, and this kit wasn't even available then. This is the 3200. Now, I can tell you right now, if I was building my Threadripper today and I saw this kit, well, I wouldn't really have a choice other than going with the lower end, which is, I would prefer not to do that, but I would have considered it. But I definitely would have gone with the 3200. Because it's come down in price. It was $600. It was actually out of stock at the time, but it was $600. Now it's $500. I don't know if I'd buy this kit, because this is actually a third-party vendor on Newegg, and I've had some problems with dealing with third-party vendors on Newegg. I won't get into the long story on that, but I would recommend use caution when buying from third-party vendors on Newegg. I would avoid it. If you can buy directly from Newegg, I recommend that, because Newegg, you're dealing with Newegg directly. All the customer service when it comes to RMAing, refunds, things like that, go through Newegg. And Newegg, for the most part, will take very good care of you. If you go through a third party, they're not like Amazon. Newegg, unfortunately, has terrible policies when it comes to third party, and they could end up screwing you. It happened to me with a Wacom tablet that I bought when I needed a new Wacom tablet because the one I had didn't have certain features that would work really well with ZBrush. So I got a new one. It was defective. I sent it back and they wouldn't refund me. And then when they finally did, they only gave me a partial refund. I ended up having to do a chargeback in order to get it resolved, and then Newegg got all pissed off and locked my account, which I couldn't have it happen because that's part of how I run my business. So I had to contact them. I explained what happened. It was just a big mess, and I mean, a lot of time lost. So I'm not saying every third-party vendor is going to be like that, but if you avoid third-party vendor and go through Newegg directly, even if you have to spend a little bit more, it's probably worth it. Now, I bring up the memory in regards to production because if you had a viewer the other day ask me about the RAM, and he wanted to get 64 gigs of RAM, but obviously he didn't really want to be breaking the bank. And at that time, this kit was $600. Of course, it was out of stock. He would have had to go to maybe eBay to get it because that's where I was looking. And it's out of the country too. It's also third party. Again, you don't know how G.Skill is going to support third party. That's another reason why you want to be careful. But it would have been $1,200 to get 64 gigs of RAM. And he wasn't going to be gaming. He was just going to be doing, I think it was just going to be rendering, maybe Maya or something like that. I can't recall. So I recommended, and again, it may not be the best recommendation, but I recommended going with the G.Skill Fortis series and picking up 2 kits of that because they're $250 a piece. Granted, the speed is 2400, but again, if you go back over here to hardware unbox and you're looking at rendering times, the speed doesn't really matter much. And if you look at further benchmarks, again, you're not seeing a significant difference as far as a performance gap when you compare the RAM speeds. So if the only reason that you would maybe want to go with the higher RAM speed is if you're gaming at least 50% of the time or more, or you just have, fuck you money and you don't care, money's no object. That would, I guess be the only reason. If you're going to be, actually, I shouldn't say 50% or more of gaming, but if you're gaming, no more than 50% of the time or less, then yeah, maybe you'd want to go that route. But if you're going all production, no, just get the slower RAM, the cheaper RAM, you'll be fine. If you're going to be gaming 50% or more, then, and you're looking at a processor of this caliber, you're better off going with an 8700K or a 2700X. I don't recommend the 9900K because I imagine those of you watching this live stream are not serious, drag racing overclockers, and you're probably not esports players, because that would be the only reason that you would really, or you just have absurd fuck you money. But those would be the only reasons why you'd want to go with the 9900K, because 9900K is beneficial if you're doing dry ice, LN2, liquid helium overclocking, and you're competing against people like Kingpin. That would be a reason to go with it. Or you're an esports professional and you are gaming at 1080p, 240 frames per second. Then yes, you'd want to go with the 9900K. The reason why is because the processor becomes very, the horsepower behind all the calculations necessary in order to provide you, the gamer, the information needed to render from the 240 frames per second. Yes, the GPU has to render those frames, but the calculations in order for the movement and everything that goes on becomes more CPU bound. And yes, at that point, you definitely want the 9900K over the 8700X and the 2700, excuse me, the 8700K and the 2700X. But let's be real. Most esports gamers, well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of the esports gamers that would be wanting something of that price range are sponsored. Most of my clients, and some of them are esports clients, they just go ahead and go with the 8700K, mostly because they're on a budget. But the third reason, and this brings me to my point full circle of the previous two, is if you just have plenty of fuck you money, and money's no object, so yeah, then go ahead. You know, if it helps you sleep good at night, then go ahead and throw out the money. But the benchmarks don't lie as far as value and performance. If you're gaming 50% of the time or more, 8700K is still better. There's not a huge difference between that and the 2700X. Some titles, yes, there will be, but I'd say probably at least half the titles, maybe 3/4 of titles that are common, will be slightly less than the 8700K. And then there'll be some titles that the 8700K are just going to be a complete dominance over the 2700X. So that's my memory spill. I just wanted to throw that out there in case any of you are considering a system of this price point and power of what your options probably you might want to consider. I think, let me see if there's anything else here that I needed to cover, because I think we're ready to wrap this up. Oh, stress test. If you are going to be manual overclocking with your Threadripper, both the CPU and the memory, Robert Halleck had recommended for the memory test, he says do your stress testing with your memory first. He recommends to do that first, which is fine. He recommends once you get your overclocks and your timings dialed in for your memory, to use a program called Lynx, L-I-N-X, Lynx. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And run that, you know, obviously for a while, make sure your memory is stable. Again, you also have to take into consideration your ambient temperatures, the seasons. Like I know for me, if I were doing it, I'd have to, you know, have different profiles for things like that. For the CPU, he recommended Prime 95. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of different benchmarks and stress tests that you can run, but this is what he recommends specifically for the Threadripper. So if you can pass those stress tests, you're pretty much good to go. Also, another thing about memory, most of you probably know this from your research, but if you're doing production, make sure you have it in distributed memory mode. If you're gaming, put it in local memory mode. I think, let's see if there's anything else. Oh, so I'm going to be doing some streaming tests. I'm going to do some more tests, and what I'm going to be doing is, obviously, some of you may or may not know this, but OBS has a feature where you can record your, you know, a demo of your stream settings, and it will record and render out the exact same quality as if you were watching it live on a stream. Because obviously the quality that you're going to get from the live stream versus the final rendered upload that YouTube or Twitch, well, Twitch isn't really good to go with, which is why I don't do Twitch. The final rendered stream is going to be much clearer. But when you're actually watching it, that's generally when you're going to see possible artifacting and things like that. So what I want to do is do some recording tests of the various settings and options that I will have with Threadripper. I'll do 1080p because I know most of you are going to want to be targeting 1080p, which is fine. But I'm mostly going to be streaming at 1440p. I'm still up in the air on whether or not I'm going to be doing medium or fast. I can do, if I go 1080p, then I can go as low as slow. But 1440p, when it comes to fast action gameplay, and if I start doing my spin tests, It struggles a little bit with slow, or actually it can't do slow at all. Not 1440p. Medium, it can do it, but it will hiccup a little bit. Fast, it's perfectly smooth and fluid, and there's very little, if any, artifacting at all at 1440p. I prefer to do 1440p because even if you're streaming at 1440p versus what you're seeing live, and you compare that with a 1080p live, it 1440p, even if I go with a higher compression, like let's say I take a 1080p stream at slow setting, and I take a 1440p stream at, let's just say, medium or even fast, the 1440p looks not just slightly better, but a lot better. So I'm still going to go ahead and go that route, even if I have to run it at the fast speed due to, you know, buffering issues and things like that. But I want to do uploads and also include in the notes the settings, because one of the frustrating things that I have found when I was doing all my research for live streaming in order to get a good quality stream was trying to find out what settings to use, and not just the settings, but what hardware. And it was so frustrating because more often than not, the information that was provided was not complete. It's like I would only get certain pieces of the puzzle, and I wasn't really getting the information that I needed. So I'm going to, once I get mine dialed in to the exact settings I want, I've already got some settings on there right now, which is pretty much what I think I'm going to be going with, but I want to run some more tests. But once I've got it down, you'll be able to go into the notes section, the notes section for the stream, and you'll be able to see exactly the settings that I have for OBS, along with the hardware that I'm using. And I didn't put this in there, but I'll go ahead and include the 1080p version as well, because I have a feeling most of you are going to want to do 1080p, because a lot of you are probably going to want to be streaming on Twitch. Again, I don't want to get into the whole reasons why I prefer YouTube over Twitch, but let's just say there are certain features of YouTube that I desire more so over Twitch. So I'll just leave it like that. All right, guys. I think that's it for me. I want to thank you guys for watching, and for those of you who are coming back and watching this as an archive video, thank you for watching it. If any of this info from my Threadripper build was of any benefit to you, I would ask that you please feel free to subscribe. In addition, click the bell icon so you know when I go live, and click the like button as well. If you have any questions or comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments section below, or if you want, feel free to drop by my live stream. You know, you're welcome to drop by, ask questions. I may not be able to answer right that second, but if you can get me, give me a minute or two to get to a stopping point within the gameplay, I will do my best to answer your question. And that's it. So again, thank you guys. Thank you for watching. And as always, keep gaming.